okay, when it's all totted up. And more importantly, in some respects, from an investor's perspective, the brand has touched the lives of many more multiples of children and has had a massive cultural impact that in time will, as we've seen before, more than likely, with Transformers and stuff like that, more than likely will result in future adults wanting to reconnect with their childhoods. I call this the childhood nostalgia premium driver. The childhood nostalgia premium driver. And in 20 years, as we've seen in so many previous examples, I believe that Avengers Issue 1 and the Avengers run will benefit from a huge drive in interest. And there'll be other titles. It's not just Avengers, but I'm using it as an example. This may or may not benefit me, but it will benefit my son, assuming I keep hold of the books, which I intend to. Remember the importance of the Avengers' success in widening participation and interest in the hobby. Overnight, relative to my lifetime, comics turned from being something avoided in discussion to being sought out and proud bandwagoning taking place. So all of a sudden, everyone was a comic book fan, weren't they? Yeah, you remember, you've seen that transition, and there's so many people now that are, comic book fans that, well, I'll leave that one for alternate videos, perhaps. Perhaps not. Whilst it's a given that there will likely be a contraction in demand for this product in line with natural brand fatigue, it is also not unreasonable to expect interest to return en masse as this generation of kids returns with disposable income in decades to come. So again, it's my long-term look at things. I don't look to flip books. I'm not interested in flipping books. I like having them in my collection. And really, some books, I swear, this is going to sound really weird or whatever. Some I have bought specifically because I've known that they'll have long-term value and they'll benefit my son. Okay, so other books are already difficult to obtain due to scarcity or price, and therefore, even if you can only get in at an entry-level lower grades, to me this represents more long-term value than characters with a shorter history and through content, though financially successful, is still by comparison only niche products with limitations on their marketability to, say, children. Now that's not to say that, again, over the long term, those are reasonable books to, buy into as well for a long-term investor, but they're just better suited, I think, for short-term flipping. Ultimately, there's no one single formula for successful investments. There is relativity. For example, what is relatively rewarding to your means, to your resources? There is interest. For example, what you're interested in collecting and what are personal goals or even grails to your collection might be, but these aren't always universal. Okay, it really doesn't matter. Once you close the doors and you're left with your collection, it's your collection. And I'll come back onto that. And it doesn't matter what other people think. It doesn't matter what I think in so many respects. It really doesn't. Okay, so, but there is always, it comes back to one thing, there is always value. And by that, I mean value for money. And items can have a high price, but still be high in value for money in terms of its low risk and good potential for return. That item can be high grade or low grade. If you paid a price that didn't hurt you beyond your means, if it brings you happiness to talk about it and to look at. My mantra is buy low, hold on, and sell high. The lower you can go, the greater the chance of a profit. This, of course, depends on the book and grade. I'm not suggesting you should exclusively buy lower grades or the lowest grades. I'm advocating that you get the most presentable books for the lowest price you can. If you can get a 1.0 book that presents at higher grade and has basic eye appeal, and you can get it for a price many times under the higher grade price boundaries, get it. You'll never be disappointed with this book. You'll always have the book to hold and look at. But you'll also be able to sit back with a smile on your face knowing exactly what you did. I don't discriminate against any grade boundaries. If the book is high and good value, I'll get it. If the book is low grade and good value, I'll get it. What I won't do as an investor is get caught up on grade. As a collector, it's potentially a different matter. With Mega Keys, I've adopted a value approach. With Keys, I've adopted a value approach, but there are some books that I read as a kid with no value to anyone but me, and in those instances I've made exceptions, because even though the book has not necessarily been sold at a value price, it has remained well within my spending budget, and I wanted a perfect copy of that particular book. So again, I guess this even in itself represents value as well. I guess ultimately what I'm saying is, don't hurt yourself financially when buying books. I've heard all sorts of horror stories involving the selling of one's assets to acquire books, getting into debt to obtain books, and going without food or missing your house payments. When you get into that stage, it's no longer a hobby, it's a problem. And you will get diminishing returns from the book in terms of value, profit, and the happiness that owning it represents. If every time you look at that book you think, oh God, I remember this happened, that happened, this was really bad, this was grim, or we're still having to then sell the book later on because of a bit of short-term thinking about involving cash flow and planning. I live my life according to my grandfather's mantra or maxim, which is to always live within your means. I can hear him say it now. Always live within your means, Eddie. He was giving me the key to stress management and happiness in life. The other thing he advocated was not to be greedy. Don't overstretch. Unless your resources are without limit, your wants will usually outstrip your resources. Now, this doesn't mean you can't have that grail, or for that matter, that mega key. But if investing or collecting within your means, it will mean understanding and embracing the concept of something called opportunity cost. People often talk of sacrifice. I believe they confuse this term with what they may actually be doing sometimes, which is living beyond their means. Now, true sacrifice is adopting the concept of opportunity cost. This means buying something at the cost of the opportunity forgone, or sacrificed. By this I mean letting go of those minor keys like New Teen Titans 2, Batman Adventures 12. By the way, these are great books, okay? Great books. I have one of them myself, okay? But paying top price for top dollar, near mint copies of these things, I'm not sure that that's necessarily the way to go for me, okay? You may be different. It might be better to, go in favour of that mega key, which, although is a much bigger financial pill to swallow, could be achieved if you made the commitment to, rather than investing in these by comparison junior keys, going for those big books, okay? They are great, those junior keys, and I love them, but what I'm saying is, don't use resources on these books if your most important goal is to buy a big blue chip mega key, because you'll just never get there. If that's your goal, it's like when I started out collecting, I got into Green Lantern and I thought, I'd like to do a complete Green Lantern run. How am I going to go about that? And I looked at the prices of the books and I looked at the run. They were cheaper with the later issues. They were super expensive, or more expensive back in the day, with the earlier ones in the run. First thing I did, I went out and I said, if I can't get a Green Lantern 1, if I can't get it, if I can't afford it, whatever, there's no point. Over years, this thing could escalate, it could go beyond my means, whatever. I was 16, I think, when I got it, 16, 17. I went out and I got Green Lantern issue 1, okay? And a few years later, when the run wasn't enough and I had to have the first appearance collector coming out in me, again, I adopted a value principle and I went and I got something that represented value for money to me. And that's the way, go out and nail those big blue chip books, whatever they might be to you, okay? But go after them. Go after those personal grails to you, but make sure that they are, don't just set out with thinking that they're too lofty whilst you're spending hundreds of dollars or whatever every month on junior books. Go straight after the big boys. Take your time. Stalk them and save. If you have to, do whatever you have to. Go after right at the top. And then fill out your collection afterwards. And you'll be in a better position because you won't be as desperate. Yeah? Okay, so that having been said, in the real world, you don't work as hard as you do every month thinking about weekly shop number 4. at the end of the month. Your primary consideration is perhaps your mortgage repayment, your rent, etc. Or if you've paid those off, then your biggest bill, your biggest household bill. The concept of opportunity cost means that we make a decision and we accept we have limited resources. Limits do vary though. Therefore, we have choices to make. And this will be a case of, it could be a case of 5 to 10 minor keys for a copy of, say, Avengers 1, X-Men 1, whatever. In some cases, in others, it will be a couple of tier 2 books for a tier 1 book, if that floats your boat. Again, this is where relativity comes in, okay? If you're getting to the stage where you're, air quotes, sacrificing Batman 1 and Superman 1 for Action Comics 1, then you probably don't need to be watching this video. So this leaves us with the question, does it work or has it worked? Okay? And from my personal perspective, my collection's returned my investment at least 4 times, and I mean at the least, I'll explain that comment, in the last 20 years. That is to say that in the very worst case scenario, each book has gone up in value at least 4 times what I paid for it. Okay, any book that I, bought with an eye to investment, that is, with the majority going up 10 to 15 times over that period, easily outstripping, inflation and things like that, with some notable exceptions going up even many more multiples. Many of these gains continued during the last global recession, when debt strangled even homeowners and house values lost their robust endurance characteristics. Throughout this time, blue chip comics and others retained and improved their value. As an investment, I'd placed comic books closer to the savings and real estate real estate of old, in terms of security, and somewhere in between savings and gambling in terms of potential return, in that you can make great gains in financial values but have a reasonable degree of security with them. While there are bubbles within the market itself, I would argue, is not a bubble. It has demonstrated its ability to self-correct in a safe and predictable manner. Segments and individual books, when overheating, they've been corrected, and in a genteel kind of fashion usually. Over time, the market and its properties have made sustainable gains in a consistent fashion. These books are not only capable of making gains, but they are reliable when it comes to making gains. You could invest as much as £50,000 or $60,000 or whatever away, squirrel it away in a bank or a building society. No longer, these things no longer have halo status thanks to Lehman Brothers and Northern Rock, those kind of more traditional investment opportunities. And you'd have a good degree of security, but with minimal return. You could tie funds up in a bond to get a little more than nothing. A long-term bond, that is, a fixed bond, fixed-term bond. Instead, invest that in 4 2.5 grade AF-15s, as I recently heard ETA and Nick advocating, and you would see a significant return on your investment while being able to rely on the decades-long established security of that title. All this having been said, I'm primarily a collector, and I've completed my collection and run my race. My business acumen informed my collecting decisions, as I was always aware of the fact that I was only ever going to be a temporary custodian of these books that I've been privileged to possess for the last few decades. Now, did I do it with an eye to the future? Yes, I did. I have an additional and fun emergency retirement fund should I need one. I also have a fun and additional financial legacy to leave my son as part of his inheritance. But what I have gained mostly, sorry to get grim, but it's true. But what I've gained mostly is the sheer joy of collecting. And this again comes into the value for money aspect. Every contact I've developed in pursuing completion and maintained since. Every communication I have with you guys, my subscribers and casuals, every friend I've made is part of the value I've derived from each book. The main buzz I get is when I'm alone and I set out all my key books in one space together and see them in their entirety as a collection, as a whole, and see a sea of colour looking back at me. Spectacular, vivid and bright. A reminder of the trips with my nana, my granddad, my mum, my dad and my son. If this experience forms your central ethos when investing, then value for money is a given. You can't go wrong. Thanks very much for watching the video in its entirety. Again, I don't mean you any offence, I genuinely don't. I love all comic books in all shapes and forms, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, please click subscribe, please ask questions, spread the word. Please do interact with me and ask questions if you'd like to on the comments. And guys, thank you so much. But remember, above all else, keep collecting.